Hello, my name is Michael Ray. I'm the director of the American Indian program here at New Mexico State University. We thank you for joining us on our digital platform, as we would have been having some events here on our campus, but at the current moment, we're just not able to. So thank you for joining us once again. Enjoy the event, and we'll see you again soon. Badoni from the Department of Anthropology. Dr. Badoni.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Making sure my microphone's on. Yeah, to add on to the housekeeping, there are going to be some noises. I've got two boys that are out of school, so you're going to probably be here, possibly the door, someone banging on the door, someone screaming, just a mess. And there might be a kid that ends up sitting on my lap, a kid that ends up pulling my hair, something. So please don't be alarmed. It's just like everyday isolation behavior in this house. So let me go ahead and start with my slides. So again, Yate, nice to see everyone's face. I'm so glad to anytime when I can interact with somebody other than a child or my husband, it's I'm like, hey, talk to me. I feel desperate for interactions. I think that's what's happening, how I'm handling this isolation process in the meantime. So yeah, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for joining us today. I am just going to talk a little bit about my background. I'm Diné and Navajo Nation. I am not Otene Trachini, that is my mother's clan, and I am born for the Kintlachini, Bipitwane Dashiche, and Kinyaane are my Nalis. Oh, there, see, did you see that? Yes, he's down here. He's hiding. He's hiding down here under the table. Yeah, so this is how it's going. I haven't figured out, of course, like how to let him be a kid when I'm in the process of doing Zoom meetings. But yeah, he doesn't seem to affect his life very much. He has his own Zoom meetings, and maybe that's what he's hiding down here. Yes, okay, there's my slides, yes. So yes, this is my first academic year at NMSU with the Department of Anthropology. I'm in Native American Studies. Dawn is my colleague, Dr. Pepion. We work together on the program, serving Native students, but also beyond Native students. And this has definitely been a very interesting first year, as far as like how we are teaching from what currently our teaching status, everybody. And I'm a very extroverted person. I love the interactions that I have with students, and I thrive on that. And what's going on with the isolation has been really difficult. So I'm trying to get a little bit more grounded in like the self-care is very important for me right now. But yeah, I've been taking on different activities when it comes to dealing with this. So let me go ahead. Okay, so here we go. This is my introduction. This is how I identify and I introduce myself in my language in Diné. So Nat Otene Trachini Nishle. So that is who I am. That is my maternal clan. This is Lane Bashichin, which means I'm born for. This is my dad right here, looking very cool in the aviator glasses. And this is my grandfather on my mother's side, Bipitwane Dashiche. And I didn't get a chance to meet him. He passed way before I was born. And this is my father's father, Kinyaane Dashinale. And of course, I didn't get a chance to meet him. This is my grandmother right here. This is my grandma. This is a protest. This is protecting. This is an act of resistance for the Navajo Hopi Land Dispute and Relocation Act that was happening well before I was born, and well into when I became a teenager, when it actually became a reality that we had to be forced off of our homelands. And this is where I'm from. This is out on the northeastern Navajo reservation. This is where I grew up. This is where I was born. T'isiatwo is the Navajo word for it. In English, it is Blue Canyon. That's what it is identified as. And this is where I really come from. I'Sinaansha, which is, this is where I really, really come from. And I was part of the forced relocation very, very early on in my childhood. It was, like I'd mentioned, that it happened way before I was born. So all these political movements and federal policies that were happening way before I came to exist. So when we were forced off our land, which was at age 6 or 7, we moved to Flagstaff, and Flagstaff is my hometown. That's where I started. That's where I started public schools. I was there through the public school systems. Did my undergraduate at my undergrad program at NAU, Northern Arizona University. So that's how I was forcibly removed from my homelands on. This is my mother right here. Some of the research that I've done in Indian education, historical and contemporary, is looking through some of my research. I was able to find a picture of my mom in one of the books that I was using, which I thought was really interesting, because we're flipping through and she's like, I think that's me. So when I talk about like where I come from and all these federal policies and all these forced relocation that was happening around me, it was also part of, my family was also part of the boarding school era. And my mom, why she was part of the book, was there was one of these pilot programs where you can have on reservation schools. You were able to go to school near your home, where she wasn't removed. She wasn't removed from home until very much later, but this was very much an early pilot education program that she was part of. So she was in the book. So I come from a very interesting socio-political background, because I've got a grandmother on one side that was a real activist, was very much about protecting and defending our homelands where we came from. And despite our efforts, we were first to move, and we moved to Flagstaff. So that is who I am, my clans, and we introduce ourselves in clans to let to connect with other Navajos, not only Navajos, but other tribal members or other bands, how we interact and how we relate to each other. So if there's another Navajo in the room, then we're like, oh, hey, you're so-and-so, we're related. But another part of my identity is I'm a mom. I identify as a mother first, and then, of course, an academic after that. But yeah, I identify as a mother first. I've got two boys. This is the one on the left over here is Jackson. And when I was doing my pictures for after I defended and doing the professional photos, I had we had the boys come with us. So all of my photos of me in my floppy PhD hat is with the kids. So I don't have like I do have one really nice photo, but Jackson was going through this Batman phase at the time and put on his Batman mask. So I don't have a very professionally one, but that's okay, because that just kind of really visually represents our lives. So he is in the first grade, but the picture of me wearing his graduation hat when he was promoted to the first grade was pretty awesome. And the second one is Emmett, and he is the one who was crawling around here on the floor. He is definitely the one who is he's three. He's he's very good at being three. But yeah, he's the one who's making our professional lives challenging right now, because one of us always has to be with him, or interacting with him, or really supervising him, because he can just like swiftly be in one place and then just gone, and we just don't know where he's at. And next thing you know, we hear the doorbell ringings because he's gone out the garage door, and it's like, so he's very stealthy like that. So yeah, he's the one who's the most challenging. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is my educational background of where I came from. Like I mentioned, I was born on the reservation, and my very early childhood experience was in the boarding schools. But I was only there for a year, and I was in a boarding school where I was able to go to the boarding school, go get my education during the day, but then my dad or my grandma were able to take me home at night. I wasn't, I have stories of being in the boarding schools. I was witness to some of the cruelty that had happened, but again, everyone is experiencing this stuff. And when you're that young, you really just don't know. Like I was 5 or 6 at the time, and really was trying to, you don't make sense of it when you're 5 or 6. I had family that I went to school with during the day. So, and of course, when you're seeing them being mistreated and being abused, that becomes your norm. And it was really until I left that to go, when I was in the Flagstaff public school system, when it was completely different. I was one of the only brown kids at my school. In the first grade, I was very much one of the only brown kids in my school. And it was a hard it was hard when you're going to predominantly nothing but Navajo kids in your kindergarten classroom or in your preschool classroom, and then going into an environment where you are exposed to other cultures other than your own. It's a culture shock. And I don't think I ever felt comfortable in my own skin until probably college, because Flagstaff is bordering on a border town. So you experience those different levels of racism, whether it be in the classroom or outside, inside the classroom or outside of the classroom. It was very much a part of my early education, which is what really directed me to go into education. I'd had experiences in like very early on with my elementary teachers, being cruel and not knowing, because you're young, not knowing how to express the verbal abuse that you're going through, but also some of the racism from other schools, the derogatory remarks, all of that. Like, you don't know how as a little kid to share that, because it becomes so much a part of your education that just kind of keeps on rolling, keeps on going and going and building up. But it wasn't until I think in college when I started going into the field of education, when I realized, oh my gosh, that was really messed up. That wasn't okay, And knowing that had existed during my education, I knew it probably existed for other students, for other Native students, but also non-Native students, for students of color, which really made me reflect on on going to into the education field. So I wrote my essay to the College of Education, because you have to write your essay to apply. And I did, and I wrote my essay entirely on this one experience that I had with my third grade teacher, of how two of my third grade teachers pretty much bullied me. They pulled me aside and they were questioning about my attendance, where I've been, and I didn't even really understand the conversation, because I think it's something that they should have talked to my mother about, but they didn't. They were like asking me, and I'm in tears. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to move from this. So feeling that, and then there's other experiences, like in the in like the 5th or 6th grade, being harassed, being dealing with racist remarks from other students. It just got more difficult, but it became a part of the normal, and it just felt like at that point that it was, you just learn to cope, and you just learn to deal. So I applied to NAU and got my bachelor's in science in education. I became an art teacher, and from there, I moved from Flagstaff to Seattle. That was my first time moving. I put Tucson, Flagstaff, and Seattle on here because these seem to be the places I keep on returning to. It's really this really strange effect of going from the desert, then back to the Pacific Northwest, then back to the desert, then back to the Pacific Northwest. It's become a joke in my family, like, oh, where are you moving to next? It's pretty laughable at this point. I think I've counted how many, I think 32 different addresses at this point. So when I am, like, I forget, like, if I'm logging into like a website and it wants to check like to make sure that I'm verified as, Georgina Badoni, and they said, which addresses is the correct one? I'm like, I don't know at this point. So it's really kind of funny how many addresses I've had. But I graduated, went up to Seattle, taught there for a couple of years, and I wanted to return back to Flagstaff, and I had applied for this position, a teaching position, up at Moenkopi Day School, which is bordering. It's in Tuba City, but it is really on the borders of the Hopi Reservation and where the Navajo Reservation meets. There is this section in Tuba City where the two reservations meet, and that's where I was teaching. I was working for the Hopis, but living on the Navajo side, so it was very complicated, but it was awesome. So I taught art up at the Hopi Reservation for a couple of years, and during my time there, I realized that they had never had an art program before. And with my students, there was so much talent. So I got involved with the Museum in Northern Arizona and some other art centers in Flagstaff, and was able to showcase my students' work. And during that time, there's such a big response, not only personally for my students, about what confidence they're able to develop from creating art or talking about their art, or their art being celebrated and acknowledged. But it also been this, I also felt like, okay, my students are doing great, but like, how do I connect the community and my students' artwork to the larger museum education field? So I started thinking about it, and I realized, like, this is something I don't know about. So I applied to graduate school, and I ended up in Tucson. And at the University of Arizona, and completed my master's program with their art and visual culture education there. And they have a museum education emphasis, a community and museum education emphasis certification part of their master's program. So I applied, I got in, and it was amazing, because, like, I think through my previous education, training, it was so limited. It was all about like making art, talking about art history, making art, and not really digging deeper into the context of art or even culture related to culture. So it really opened my eyes. It was a really awesome program. I had a fantastic mentor advisor at the University of Arizona. She's retired this year, Dr. Elizabeth Garber, and I call her Dr. Garber like always. It just becomes like this level of respect for me of like what. So even though like she was on my my dissertation committee, and I remember after I defended successfully, she pulls me aside. She says, "You can call me Elizabeth now." She's like, "It's okay." I'm like, "Nope, sorry. I just don't. I'm not there yet. I think maybe perhaps if I've got more years under my belt, then maybe I'll be at the level of, you know, being her, being her colleague at that point. But like I think will feel like a student to her. So I think it was a remarkable program. It allowed me to explore cultures, but also very contemporary ways of material and teaching about material. My thesis during the time was looking at Native American skateboards imagery and how that teaches oral history and how that can be used in the classroom. It was really great. I mean, like to be able to use skateboards like as your thesis, it was pretty awesome. And graduated during that a month before I defended my thesis. I went on a job interview up to Seattle at a tribal school. They were looking for an art teacher, and I went up there and I interviewed, and I totally thought I bombed the interview. You know, I thought the person who's head of the committee was awful, and I was like, oh gosh, this is a terrible white guy, oh my gosh, and I left the interview and I got back into the rental car and I was crying. I cried. I was like, oh my God, I didn't get the job. What am I going to do? When a month before you graduate, you have no job prospects, and it was a horrible feeling. And, and like the next day I got a phone call that offered the position. I was like, oh yes, cool. Yes, I'll take the job, just because I was like, yes, I'll do it. So we moved from Tucson. Then back up to the Pacific Northwest again. So this is again another second time I'm up in Seattle. And I taught at the tribal school for 4 years. And the person who was on my committee, the person who was head of the search committee for that position, I'm married to. So it's pretty funny. So yeah, so he was, yeah. So my husband he's in human resources. So that's how we met. It's like, I thought and we share that story because I'm like, oh man, I thought you totally hated me. He's like, no. He's like, that's my human resources face. So that's how we met, was working for the tribe. And we had Jackson, and Jackson was a great pregnancy. But right after he was born, I had post-delivery paralysis. I was paralyzed for 6 months in my right foot. Right immediately, like after he was born, I asked for the epidural. They put it in my back, and they hit a nerve. And it's one of these things that you sign off on paperwork when you're in labor for like 4 days for a child that is just not wanting to get out of your body. You're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. So I did, and but we realized that, how am I going to take care of myself? Like, my husband had to go back to work. My parents were up in Seattle taking care of me. And they said, sorry, you're not doing this. So they packed me and Jackson up and they said, we're going. So 2 weeks after he was born, we left. We left Seattle, came back to Arizona. And I lined up some doctors up in Tucson through the University of Arizona Medical, and they're able to do testing. And they said, yes, they hit a nerve, but we don't know if you're going to get your nerve sensations back. So they hooked me up to like a car battery, and they said, well, it's not you did get some nerve damage, but you should be able to heal, but we don't know when. It could be 6 months from now, it could be 6 years from now. So I started doing physical therapy. And my husband at that point was like, I can't be without you and our newborn. So he just left. He just up and left, put what he could into a moving truck. My dad went back up there and came back, and that's how we ended up back in Tucson. And I started teaching art the first year back in Tucson. And one of my students says to me, you know, it's Halloween. She comes up to me. She says, hey, Ms. B. She said, hey, Badoni, guess what? Guess what I am? I'm like, oh, I don't know, you know. And she says, I'm an Indian. And she was wearing these faux moccasins, you know, the kinds you get at Target, and was wearing some, like, you know, southwesterny glittery shirt, and had painted, like, you know, put face paint on. And I was like, oh gosh. And I was like, oh, you know, I was like, oh, this is not good, you know, and like, this is terrible. Fall is always, I think, the worst month, the worst season for Native Americans, because you've got, you know, Columbus Day, you've got Thanksgiving, and of course, like, you've got Halloween, because, you know, all these things that happen, and it's still very much alive and practice. And I had shared a wall with the fourth grade teacher. And one day, you know, my classroom was stinking like onions and, you know, stuff. And I'm like, what is that? So I go next door to see what's going on. They are recreating a Thanksgiving feast. So I was like, oh, okay, that's it. This is it. Like, so I was like, you know, obviously my work is not done. And I started thinking more about going into applying for a program in Native American Studies, American Indian Studies, and I did. Since I was in Tucson, and they're one of the programs that did have Native American Studies, so I pursued it, and yeah, so I got in. That's how I started my PhD work with was in Tucson, and was there for a very for several years. But you know, when you're applying for a doctoral program and you've got a 2-year-old, you're thinking, how am I going to do this? You know, how am I going to be able to manage this? And you needed support. So I sought other women, other Native American women that were in my lives that had children that were doing the same thing. I said, you know, how do you go about this? And they shared with me, you need support. So my parents, who were in Flagstaff, moved in with us. They lived with us. They took care of our young one when I was going to school. My mom would get dinner started. So I had a great support system to complete my doctoral work. And I was a year into my program when we found out we were expecting our second child. And, you know, immediately we're like, okay, so when is he due? And they said, oh, he's due in July. We're like, yes, you know, he's due in July, right in the summertime, right before classes start back up again. And yeah, so I was working on my comprehensive exams when I was 5 months pregnant, and and that was intense. And then just went ahead and kept on rolling with it. Just kept on doing my doctoral studies and my work. And he was born in July, and less than a month later, I'm back at school finishing up my last year. So yeah, that's how that came to be.